right, so lecture 2, and we are still alive. Okay, so as I promised you, right on the dot at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. local time here, we are going to start with the iClicker questions that we did not go over last time. So here is the first question. All right, Ray, let's try to select this one from your end and see if the iClicker starts.
Okay.
What is the study of the body's structure? So what is your answer? Should be quite obvious. Any brave soul?
Yeah, up front.
Okay.
Okay, she says B, anatomy.
Yes, that's the correct answer. So whoever answered B got 3 points already for extra credit, because 1 point is for turning on your iClicker, another point is for trying to answer, and the third point was for answering it correctly. If you just turn on your iClicker and answer anything other than anatomy, you still get 2 points at this stage. Okay.
Okay, so Doctor, was I supposed to click on the iClicker like remote thing, the correct answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you do that and you have a little green thing that showed up? Okay, if you didn't, it's fine. I'll fix that later at my end.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so now we go for the next question. Which of the following is a logical organization? So you got to think a little more for that. So if you're counting up, you might give it a minute for that. So did you start the clicker already?
I did, yes.
Okay.
But how do I select the right answer when I don't know what the right answer is?
You don't?
Ignore that. I'm just not the professor.
Okay, you're gonna give me a heart attack right now.
You're giving me a heart attack. You said this was easy.
It is easy. You go from micro to macro. Tiny ones. What is the first tiny thing that comes to your minds? Definitely not molecules. Scratch B out.
I'm not prepared. And then I click send. Did I send it? No base.
Okay, did everybody answer? Does anybody need more time? Let me see a hand up if you need time. Okay, I don't see hands up, so let's stop the question. And which one is the correct answer? Brave soul?
Yeah, they're saying D.
All right, let's see. Atoms make molecules, and those make cells, and the cells make tissues. Yes, D is your correct answer. Okay, did you select there? If not, okay, I'll take care of that later. Okay,
so it says there's no base, but the base is plugged in and it's on, so I don't really.
Okay, ignore that. All right, so we're going to pick up here from where we left off last time, and we are talking about the needs that living things have for certain things to survive, right? Now, keep in mind here that these survival needs is not only that you have to have them, but you have to have them in the right proportions depending on your um, uh, metabolic demand. Okay, so let's see here. Nutrients. If you have too little of nutrients, well, you're going to be malnourished. If you have too much of nutrients, you're going to start developing extra storage cells like fat cells that are not quite wanted, and eventually you'll turn into obesity. Now, oxygen. Of course, if you have too little oxygen, your brain cells are the first one to die, and you're going to die. All right. If you have too much oxygen, you have another problem. You're going to have some crazy free radicals running around, and that's also detrimental to health. Okay. Then we go here to water. Of course, too little water, you dehydrate, you die. Too much water, then you have a different problem, as we're going to see with osmosis, right? Water goes from an area of high water concentration to area of low water concentration. And if you ingest too much water, just water without electrolytes, too much water at once, you're going to have some serious problems. Now, let me see a show of hands. Who has heard of some marathon runners that died because they drank too much water before a race? Has anybody heard that story? One, two, three people. Did we have any athletes in the class? Usually I have a bunch of athletes. Yeah, okay. So what do you do before you go for a competition? You make sure you're hydrated, but you make sure that you're not overhydrated, because if you drink too much water in a very short period of time, your blood is going to get diluted. Then the blood is going to circulate throughout your body. When your blood gets to your brain and is in contact with the blood-brain barrier, the water that is more concentrated in your blood, because your blood is more dilute, that water is going to pass through the blood-brain barrier and is going to start filling up your brain cells with water. That means your brain is going to start swelling. But you don't have space for brain swelling because the brain is encaged in this solid box that is your cranium. So what's going to happen? Well, I can't hear everybody trying to respond at once, but what is going to happen is that you're going to start pressing your brain, and you can go into convulsions or a coma, or you can even die from drinking a lot of water at once. Right? So yeah, I mean, if you have not heard of that problem before, now you're more aware of it. So too much water, not good for you. Now, when you talk about body temperature, we know we are warm-blooded creatures, and we need that temperature to be kept at a certain range. And that range is optimal for the functioning of the little machines that are inside of your cells. Okay, so if you deviate too much from that body temperature, your cells are not going to work at their optimal. Too little temperature, you go into hypothermia. That means you're going to freeze. And if your body temperature increases too much, then you go into hyperthermia, and you're going to start having, convulsions, and you can probably die from hyperthermia. And we might touch that subject a little bit when we talk about how different stages of different life stages can cope better with certain increases in body temperature. Like, for example, children can deal better with the changing body temperature, like with a fever, right, than adults. Right? So children have a bit more leniency on this range of body temperatures, but adults have a lot less flexibility with this range. And we know that fever in adults, and especially like elderly, it can be life-threatening. Okay, so your body temperature has to be kept at a certain range. And same thing goes with atmospheric pressure, because as we're going to see, well, next term when you take AMP2, as we're going to see, gases are also dissolved in your blood. And the solution of those gases, the way that they dissolve in the solution, really has to do with atmospheric pressure. So if you have too little atmospheric pressure, you're not going to have enough gases, like, for example, oxygen, dissolving in your blood and being picked up by your blood in your lungs. Now, if you have too much pressure, that can also be an issue for balance of gases. All right, so everything that is needed for survival, all these factors, they do have to follow a certain range, and they do have to be tightly regulated. And the tight regulation of all of those factors is really a function of physiology. All right, so when we talk about nutrients, what are we talking about? Well, basically, we're talking about, in this case, macronutrients, in which you have three types of macronutrients. You have your carbohydrates, and those are a major source of quick energy. Then you have your proteins, which of course those are made up of amino acids, and they are very important for building components or anabolic aspect of your metabolism. And then you have your fats. Those are also used for energy, but it's not a quick energy source. This is more like long-term energy storage. And and one of the uh, very handy ones are the triglycerides here. So macronutrients are here, and then you have your micronutrients, and those are the minerals and vitamins that are also indispensable for proper functioning of your cells. Okay. So these are nutrients. And then oxygen, as we mentioned, is extremely important for proper metabolism and maintenance of cell life. Okay. And we know that we can survive a few minutes without oxygen, but if you go for in average more than 5 minutes without oxygen, that's a big problem because your brain is very sensitive to lacking oxygen. So you're going to have some damaged cells if you have prolonged um, lack deficiency in oxygen. So as we mentioned here in water, and we all know that the life on Earth, and I believe in also other planets, is based in water or aqueous environment or aqueous solutions, right? And we do need to maintain a proper body hydration, right? And as we mentioned also with the body temperature, we also need to keep that at a very close range. And we mentioned also with atmospheric pressure. And now we start talking about homeostasis. Okay, so what is this homeostasis? So here we see a definition of homeostasis. And it's saying this is the maintenance. Oh, now this thing's not going to work. So maintenance of relatively stable internal conditions. This is talking about the body, inside the cells. Now, this maintenance of the internal conditions, they have to be adjusted and kept constant even with a constant change in the environment. Okay? So the homeostasis is the capacity of living things to keep the internal environment stable, but at the same time adjusting to the outside changes. Okay, this process is very dynamic. So homeostasis is not something that is um, uh, totally constant at all times. It is continuously getting adjusted. Okay, it's always having to adjust to whatever is happening to the outside environment. So here the book has for as analogy, this guy walking on the tightrope and really balancing himself to keep his center of equilibrium and not fall to one side or the other. And here comes another freebie for you. So please, Ray, well, okay, let's read through this first because you do have some long answers here, right? So you want to be ready to click the right answer once the iClicker goes on because you only have about 30 seconds, right? So here. So the question is asking you the definition of homeostasis. So your options. A, the ability to maintain relatively stable external conditions. Okay. When the output shuts off the original. Oh, we didn't even start talking about this thing yet. Okay. Now, the response enhances the original stimulus so that, well, that thing is also talking about the changing to the stimulus. Okay, the ability to maintain relatively stable internal conditions. So I'm assuming that everybody knows which one is the correct answer. So are we clicking the iClicker for that? Yes, Ray, is
Yeah,
everybody
sorry,
on?
it's working. Sorry. Yeah.
All right. Okay, was that time?
Do you want me to stop it at 30?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm assuming that everybody has answered. All right, so what's your answer?
Okay, in the very silent room, but also on the screen, they can see that the answer is D.
Okay, so the answer is D. You want to maintain your internal environment quite much stable. All right, so how does the organism do that? What is the trick that your cells and your body have to maintain homeostasis? Well, basically, there are two ways in which you can do that. One way is really quick, and the other way takes more time. Okay, so you have sensors that are throughout the body, and those sensors are going to notice if something is out of the ordinary. So, for a quick adjusting of homeostasis, you send information to your nervous system. For a slow adjustment of the internal conditions, you're going to send information to your endocrine system. And of course, you do have other systems that are playing in the maintenance of this process, but mainly you should think quick response, nervous system, slow response, endocrine system. Okay. Now, what are the things that are changing in your body that you have to adjust your homeostasis to? Okay. So first thing you can think is level of blood sugar, and this is your glucose level. So when you have too much glucose level, like for example when you just eat a huge piece of chocolate, right, your blood glucose level goes up a lot and very quickly. When that happens, you have sensors in your pancreas that are going to tell some cells of your pancreas that there's too much sugar out there. So your pancreas is going to respond by sending out a messenger. In that case, this is an endocrine system type of response. Okay, it's not instant, but it's a bit slower than a simple reflex arch. Okay, so your pancreas sends out, it feels that change, sends out some molecules of insulin. They're going to get into your bloodstream and then hit target cells and tell those target cells to pick up some sugar from the blood. Okay, so those cells are going to be cells in your liver. They're going to be in your, okay, so let me just put it here. Okay, so now this thing isn't working. Okay, so those cells are going to be present in your liver. They're going to be present in your fat cells. They're also going to be present in muscle cells. Okay, so those cells are going to have receptors for insulin, and they're going to respond to the presence of insulin, and they're going to pick up that sugar and take out the sugar out from your bloodstream. Okay, your brain also picks up some of that sugar. Okay, so now what's going to happen? You look at your blood levels, and those are going to go down to normal levels or close to normal levels. All right, so that is one example of a change in this response that is controlling the internal environment. All right. Then you have another example here of body temperature. Okay. The thermostat of your body, where it regulates the temperature, that is present inside your hypothalamus in your brain. The hypothalamus, as we'll see later, is right behind the um, epiphysis. Okay, oh, now the other word escaped my mind, but this very important gland in your brain. Okay, so the hypothalamus is going to feel some change in your temperature, and it's going to send a signal that is going to regulate some other part of your body to respond accordingly. So let's say, for example, if your body increases in temperature, let's say that you are, for example, running a marathon. Okay, so your body temperature is increasing a lot because your muscles are really increasing the heat in your body, right? So your hypothalamus is going to send a message to some other part of your body, like for example your skin cells, and your hypothalamus send a message telling your skin cells to start to sweat because you want to cool off your temperature, cool off your body, right? So when you sweat, the evaporation of water from your skin cools down your body temperature. Okay, so that's another type of mechanism that is controlling overall temperature. And then you have this other example here that is blood volume. Okay, so let's say, for example, you drink a lot of water. Of course, not as much water as those, not very informed people, before running their marathon, right? So let's say you drink a lot of water. Now your blood volume increased, and you don't want to have too much blood volume because if you do, then you're going to start swelling. Like your whole body is going to start swelling, right? Hopefully not your brain. Hopefully not, you not drink that much water. Now what's going to happen? You have some sensors in your body, like for example in your kidneys, that they are going to feel the increased volume, and they are going to send signals to other parts of your body to make sure that the volume gets decreased. Okay, like how? You're going to start producing diuretic hormones. Diuretic means that you're going to go through diuresis, which is extra urination. Okay, so the adjustment to increased blood volume is going to be increased urination. The opposite is also true. If you have too little blood volume, you're going to start stimulating receptors that are going to tell your brain that you should be thirsty. So your body is going to start producing thirst hormones, and you're really going to start feeling your mouth is dry and you really want to drink something. So that is a kind of a response that your body is going through to really try to maintain the internal conditions. Okay. So here, when you're controlling homeostasis, you really have to look at these factors, these three factors here. First thing, you have to know what's going on. What is the change? So you must have a receptor. So that's your first factor here. You must have a receptor to feel the change. Then you're going to have a processing center, so a control center that is going to decide on what to do. And at last, you're going to have effector centers or effector cells. They're going to respond in a way to bring your system back to homeostasis. So here in more detailed explanation, so your receptor or your sensors, they are going to keep constantly monitoring the environment, and they'll be able to respond once they feel something is wrong, something is out of the ordinary. Then you activate your control center that is going to determine how you should respond. Usually the control center is going to go through a negative feedback mechanism. So usually control centers are going to respond with negative feedback, and we're going to see in more details how that is. Okay, your control center is going to determine what has to be done and is going to send out messages. Those messages can either be through the nervous system, or they can be through endocrine system via hormones. So your nervous system will work with electricity. Your endocrine system will work with molecules, with hormones that are going to go into your bloodstream. Mainly, they are going to hit the effector cells. So the effector cells, based on what information they got from the control center, they are going to respond accordingly, according to, do they have to adjust in one way or another. So usually your control centers always send negative feedback. But there are a few cases in which your control center will send information to increase the change or the tip of the balance towards more of what you got in the first place. Okay, and we're going to see examples of that too. So sometimes, basically in two occasions, your control center is going to tell your effector cells, all right, do more of what you started to do. Okay, so in two cases you're going to see, instead of a negative feedback, in two cases you're going to see a positive feedback. First one is going to be when you are looking at hemostasis. Okay, and this is blood clotting. Okay, so how does that work? Let's say that you have a cut in artery and you're starting to bleed. So now when you start to bleed, you're going to start activating some cells or some fragment of cells, and those are little platelets. Okay, so here I'm just drawing some little platelets. So those platelets are inside the blood vessel. Okay, so this blood vessel has a cut. Okay, and here you are starting to bleed, so this is blood. Okay, so what's going to happen with those platelets? They're going to come close to this tear in your blood vessels, and they're going to start changing personality. When they get there, they're nice and round. When they feel the cut, they start to become like star shaped. They get little spikes. Okay, and they start to get stuck to each other. Okay, because you want to form a platelet plug. Okay, so then what happens? The platelets get there, and as other platelets are coming along, they get also stuck and they become star-like. So the more platelets get there, the more star-like shape you're going to get. So this is the case of positive feedback. So there was the change in homeostasis was due to the bleeding. But then when you started to see a platelet response to the bleeding, you started to see change of shape, and then you increase the change of shape. So this is your positive feedback example. All right. The other example that you have of a positive feedback in the body is uterine contractions during child labor. Okay, and you can imagine when a pregnant woman is starting to undergo contractions for labor. The contractions start to get, from far apart, they start to get closer and closer together. So that is an example of a positive feedback. The closer they are together, the closer they will get in time. Okay, so two examples of positive feedback mechanisms. Do you have questions? No, is everybody cool? Yeah, okay. So here is that diagram from your book that is showing the interactions of homeostatic control. Okay, and as we mentioned here, you always want to keep this internal system in balance. And once you have a change in balance, that is going to set off a stimulus to some cells that are meant to sense the stimulus. Okay, so you have your receptor cells that are sensing something strange. The receptor cell sends information to your control center that something is odd. Then your control center is going to send information to effector cells, and the effector cells are going to respond to bring your internal state back to balance. So now we have these examples of what's going on in case of body temperature changes, right? So quickly, as I have already mentioned, so let's see what happens here. If you were in a homeostatic balance, but then you have increasing body temperature. As you see, this guy was exercising and running, so he's increasing his body temperature. Now, he has receptors that are all over his body, especially in the skin, right? And those receptors are going to send information to the thermal control in the brain, so that's in your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is going to send signal to effector cells, and those are sweat cells also on your skin, and you're going to start sweating. Now, when you start sweating, you're putting water on the surface of your skin, and the water is going to evaporate, hopefully. We're talking about places other than South Florida, right? So you're going to start to evaporate the water, and the evaporation of the water is going to cool off your body. Now, why did I say most places but not in Florida? Well, because sometimes, as you know, the humidity of the air reaches like 100% in Florida. And if the air is already saturated with water, you cannot evaporate water from your skin, okay? Because the air is already saturated. The water has like nowhere to go. So if you are just hot and sweating and the water is not evaporating, then your body is not really getting any cooler, okay? So if you are in a place of high humidity, then you are really going to have some issues with hyperthermia, okay? And that can lead into a heat stroke. And we know that whenever the temperature is, really, really hot outside, we all say, don't go out when the sun is really intense, when the heat is really intense, because you can develop some heat shock. Okay. All right. So this was one example of how your body is cooling off your temperature. And here is the other example. And of course, this here is your negative feedback. Okay. So let's say here, for example, that you are in a place like I am right now in winter in São Paulo, and today is not really that cold outside. Like yesterday was really, really cold. So you step outside and you start shivering, right? Now what is happening here? What happens is that when you step outside, you have receptors, still those receptors in your skin, but they feel that change in temperature and it's really, really cold. Receptors send information to your control center of temperature in your brain. Your brain is going to send information, in this case, to your muscle cells, okay? You don't want to send information to your skin, because if you evaporate some water, if you start sweating, you're going to get even colder, and that's is not really what your body wants to do, okay? So now your effector cells are your muscle cells, especially your skeletal muscle cells, and your skeletal muscle cells start to contract, means you start to shiver. When your muscles are contracting, you are increasing your body temperature, and hopefully you will get back to your normal body temperature. Okay, so this is another case of negative feedback. And here is your case of a positive feedback. So as we mentioned, when you have, in case here of bleeding, you are going to have the beginning of coagulation process. So in this case, you're going to have your platelet cells, that those are the sensors, and they are going to start responding locally, okay? They're going to start responding right there. They sense they're in the tissue or in the organ, and they're going to start to change their physiology here. They start, although here it is not looking like those little stars, but they're going to start to change their shape, and they're going to start making a platelet plug to stop the bleeding. So the response here of more cell aggregation and increased change of shape of those platelets, that is your example of a positive feedback. So make sure that you understand what is this positive feedback. This has to do with the platelet response and the formation of the plug. Okay? Do we have questions about that? Okay, well, along. And here's another question for you. You're full of points today. Which of the following is an example of a negative feedback mechanism? So remember, I gave you two examples of a positive feedback. Those examples were for normal, healthy body conditions. I have not gone into disease states because those are never normal. Okay, you do have other examples of positive feedback during disease states, and you can deduce that. But let's see what your answers are saying here.
It's the wrong one. Okay. We're still having a lot of problems over here, Dr. Waziri, and on the website it says that like to do web polling, you can't use the iClicker devices. Like it has to be mobile only. So the people
What?
who are using the iClicker devices can't do the assignments. By the way,
What?
just saying.
That is crazy.
Yeah, lots of problems. But can you guys see the correct question now? Okay.
I'm wondering if you open locally, if that's gonna be better.
I think it is locally because it's all on the same computer. But then again, I've got no idea how any of this works. So who knows?
Oh, I guess
But I
let's
did try
do.
doing it on my laptop, and I tried switching it to remotes and mobile devices, and then when I tried opening the polling, it said to do web polling, you can only use mobile devices. So
Maybe it is detecting the PowerPoint as web. Well, let's do the best we can with what we have right now, and hopefully by next class we'll fix that issue.
okay, I'm gonna stop it in 5 seconds. Okay.
All right, so what is your correct answer here?
They're saying B.
All right, so let's see here for negative feedback. The thyroid gland releases thyroid hormone under the influence of the hormone thyroid stimulating hormone that is going to decrease when the hormone levels reach the set point. Exactly, that is your correct answer. Now remember, I mentioned labor as one of the cases of positive feedback. Okay, and then this one here, we just read through that and you see this is also a case of positive feedback, but that is due to disease state. Okay, so they're saying capable, an individual who is incapable of synthesizing the thyroid hormone will often develop an enlarged thyroid gland to the continuous stimulus. So in this case, you keep on stimulating, and the gland keeps on getting bigger. So that's example of a positive feedback mechanism. But then again, it's because it's not working properly. All right, so now we're going to get into anatomical terms. And yes, there are lots of things to memorize, but I'm going to stick to the ones that are most obvious because I really don't like a lot of memorization. Yeah, I know it's kind of ironic, but right, I prefer you understand and stick to things that really make more sense. But we can't really run away from a lot of memorization. So first thing to know is the anatomical position. Okay, so anatomical position, what is it? You see this person here standing up and it is facing you and it has the thumbs sticking to the outside of the body, right? So this is the anatomical position. Ray, would you mind showing the class what is the anatomical position? So now we have a live in-person example of the anatomical position. Thank you, thank you. Round of applause for Ray. Thank you. All right. So important to remember, the palms have to be facing forward. The thumbs have to be sticking out. All right, thumbs sticking out. Okay. What else you have to remember from here? When you talk about right and left, you're always talking about this person that is in the anatomical position. So you look at the person and you're going to say, oh, this side here of the person is the right side. The other side of the person is the left side. So when you're talking about right and left, it's always about that subject that is in the anatomical position. So we're going to look at directional terms that really have to do with this anatomical position. So terms that you have to know. When you talk about superior, that has to is usually used in relation to the head. So when you say superior or cranial, it has to do with being close to the head. On the other hand, if you say inferior, and that's for humans, right? That has to do on how far away it is from the head, okay? Caudal is used for animals, okay, because we don't have a tail. Caudal has to do with tail, okay? So for people, we say inferior. Okay. When you're using the term anterior, that has to do with the position that is in relation to the front of the body. So anterior is close to the is towards the front of the body. On the other hand, posterior is to the back of the body. Now, other terms that are very much interchangeable is there are here ventral, that goes hand in hand with anterior. On the other hand, here dorsal, it has to do with the back. Okay, so dorsal and posterior are more or less interchangeable. When used, those terms in relation to something else that you're talking about, you say here, for example, the breastbone that is like right in front, very close on your chest. The breastbone is anterior, so is more to the front than the spine. Then the spine is dorsal to the breastbone. So when you use a term that says medial, so that's like right in the middle. So when something is medial, it's going towards the middle of the body. So for the example here that you have is the heart is medial to the arm. And of course, those terms are always used in relation to something else. So you're describing how close or how proximal the certain parts of the body are to each other. Okay. So medial is when something is closer to the middle of the body in relation to some other part of the body. Okay. On the other hand here, lateral has to do with something that is further away from the middle of the body. Okay, so if you see, for example, here, the hand is lateral to the belly button, or the arm is lateral to the chest. Okay. And then you have this other term that says intermediate. So again, these terms are always used in relation to something else. Okay. So when you look at a term that says intermediate, so it's not really in the middle, it's not really to the sides, because if it was in the middle, it would be medial. If it was to the sides, it would be lateral. So when you say intermediate, it's something that is between the middle and the side. So intermediate to what? So now you have to see what are the terms that you're comparing here. You say here, for example, in this phrase, the collarbone is intermediate between the breastbone and the shoulder. So now it's telling you collarbone is right here. So it's intermediate to breastbone and the shoulder, more or less like in the middle. Or you can say, you can practice those terms in phrases just to make sure that you understand how they are used. Like you can say the same way, the nipple is intermediate between the breastbone and your arm. So other terms that you have to know, proximal, proximal to what? Usually proximal to the head, okay? But again, relative terms. Distal, again, distal from the head. When you say superficial or deep, that is usually related to the surface of the body or to the skin, okay? So we can say here, the skin is more superficial than the muscles or the bones. Or you can say the bones are deeper than the skin or than the muscles. So those terms are in relation to the surface of the body. So make sure you understand, you really memorize those terms and know how to locate things in the body. Okay, and make sure you do your homework so you get better practice on what I can possibly ask you in relation to those terms. Okay. So here, more regional terms. When you talk about axial, you are talking about the trunk, the core of the body. Okay, so axial is going to be the head, the neck, and the core of the trunk. When you talk about appendicular, those are your arms and legs. Okay, and we're going to see we have axial skeleton, appendicular skeleton. So axial is the core, appendicular is limbs. So here are several terms that are very commonly used, okay, in a class like this. So what you should know: cephalic, that has to do with the head; cervical, that has to do with your neck; abdominal, obviously with your belly; pelvic, that is the region below the abdominal region; pubic, that is related to genitals. Okay. Upper limb, you should know just basic terms like brachial, that's your arm. Okay. Carpal is very commonly known because a lot of people have carpal tunnel syndrome from using too much computer. So carpal is really your wrist. Manus is the hand. Okay. Pedal is the foot. What else you should know here? Oh, yeah, this is axillary. That's your armpit. Okay. So just go over these main commonly used terms and be familiar with them. And yes, memorization. When you look at the back of the person, you basically have some of the same terms. Cephalic. Okay. Otic, that has to do with your ears. Okay. This is a good one here. Occipital, that is the back of the head. Okay. Cervical is still your neck. Okay. And let me see here. There are some strange terms that I'm not going to bother you with, like olecranon. Who cares? Okay. So carpal is still the same, wrist. Okay. Manus is still your hand. And yeah, your foot here, you have pedal. Okay. And one thing that is important here, when you look at the bottom of your foot, you say that is plantar. Okay. Okay. So, oh yeah, of course, cannot forget the gluteal. That's an interesting one. That is your butt cheek. Okay. Sacral, that's the end of your spine right there. And we're going to see, when you look at the skeleton, we're going to see the vertebral column. And yes, we're going to have to know vertebral and lumbar and sacral. That's going to come later. Okay. So here, in how many different ways can you cut up the body? So this is quite interesting and very much intuitive. If you have a plane that is cutting up the body right in the middle, you call that a median plane. You can also call it sagittal or mid-sagittal. Okay. Now, when are you going to use these terms? Let's say that you are looking at a specific image that is showing exactly half of the body, and you actually see the vertebral column. So you can imagine this image was taken using a plane that went in the middle of the body. So when you look at this image, you should automatically guess that this plane of image is a median or sagittal plane. Okay. Now the other option that we have here is a frontal or coronal plate or plane. Okay. Now let's see how to remember this. Frontal, you're looking at the front of the person. So this is a plane that is going to divide the body into front and back. Okay. Now, another way to remember this is that coronal has to do with the crown. So if you imagine that you're putting a crown over your head, yes, Ray, can you demonstrate how you put a crown over your head? Okay, so the plane that links the crown to your elbow, considering you have your elbow on the side of your body, to your shoulder, that is your coronal plane. Okay, so imagine here this person is putting a crown in the head, or demonstrating there, putting a crown in the head. That plane is your coronal or frontal plane. When you look at an image, for example, here, you're looking at an image that is showing the part of the body that is looking like it was cut in the middle, you should clearly identify this as a frontal or coronal plane. How are you going to see that? You're going to see, well, we can see both of the lungs here, you can see the heart here. So the only way that you can get this type of image is by cutting through the frontal plane. Okay. Then another version that you have here of how to chop up the body is this transverse plane. So a transverse plane is cutting the body like in upper part and lower part. This one is showing right in the midsection. So this is transverse midsection. But transverse plane can be anywhere, like anywhere in a transverse plane like that, okay? So usually when you go through CT scans or MRIs, you see a lot of transverse planes that get put together into a 3D image, okay? So when you look at an image like this, and you see that it's very much round, you see the other images, those are not round, okay? This one is round, so that tells you you most likely went through like the middle of the body like that, okay? So that's an image that is due to a transverse plane cut. So this is when I start giving you clues about what is going to be in the test, okay? And usually, I'm in class, I put my arms up and I say clue, all right? If you see diagnostic imaging, and I ask you, what is the plane that generated that image? You should be able to give me the correct answer, right? So for example, if I put something like this, and I ask you, what is the plane that generated that image? You should be able to tell me there was a transverse plane, and go through the exercise with the other planes as well. Okay. All right, so now we get to the body cavities. All right, so two major body cavities. You have the dorsal, so that is the one that has to do with the brain and spinal cord. Remember, dorsal has to do with the back. Okay, so brain and spinal cord is your dorsal cavity. And then you have your ventral. That has to do with everything that is inside the body here. Okay, not to do with the brain and spinal cord. All right. So of course you're going to have subdivisions to those as well. When you look at the dorsal cavity, okay, that is what is going to house your brain and your spinal cord. So then they'll give you two subdivisions. It's going to give you the cranial cavity, and it's going to give you the vertebral cavity. So vertebral cavity is going to give you the spinal cord. Cranial cavity is going to encase your brain. Okay. Then when you go and you look into the ventral cavity, you're going to see that it has a lot of subdivisions as well. Okay, so the ventral, when you say ventral, that has to do with the guts, but that is going to enclose everything that is in the core here of your body. Okay, you're going to have two major subdivisions of your ventral body cavity. So you're going to have one that is the upper part that is called the thoracic cavity, and then you have this other one that is going to hold everything else under the diaphragm. So this other one here is your abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay. So looking at the thoracic cavity, you're going to see that you have subdivisions in that too. So you're going to have two subdivisions, two main subdivisions. One of them is going to have two sacs. So those are going to be the pleural cavities. Those are going to hold your lungs. There is one pleural sac per lung. They are not connected, okay? They are different sacs here. One of them is going to hold your right lung, the other one is going to hold your left lung. So pleural cavities, two of them. Then you're going to have this one that is really, really important, that is going to hold your heart. This is going to be your pericardial cavity. Cardio has to do with the heart, so it's only one of it, okay? Pericardial cavity. And you're also going to have an area that is between those two cavities and is right above your pericardial cavity. So that's going to be this area of the mediastinum, the superior mediastinum. Now keep in mind that this whole part in the middle here is called the mediastinum. Okay? So pericardial, the whole thing is mediastinum, and then you have the two pleural cavities. So now you get to the belly, and you also have two major subdivisions. You're going to have your abdominal cavity, and then you're going to have your pelvic cavity. Okay, and the whole thing together is your abdominal pelvic cavity. What you're going to find your abdominal cavity? Most things that are related to digestion. You're going to have your stomach, spleen, liver, intestines, all this stuff that goes in here, pancreas, okay? Although pancreas goes a bit out of that cavity too. But here, out of that enclosed membrane. And we're going to see that when you get to the pancreas, okay? When you look at the pelvis, you're going to find the urinary bladder and reproductive organs. You're also going to find the rectum in this cavity as well, okay? Although most of your large intestine is in your abdominal cavity, but the rectum is going to be in the pelvic cavity. So be familiar with which organs are in which cavity. Okay. All right, so now just a little bit of a taste of what happens when things go wrong. When you have certain structures that come out of their cavity and they spill over to a nearby body cavity, you call that a hernia. Okay? So here is an example of one type of hernia that is hiatal hernia. Okay? So what happens here is that your stomach that should be in your abdominal cavity, when it protrudes out through, so let's just draw here quickly here. So here's part of your abdominal cavity. So here's going to be your esophagus, and that's going to be your stomach right there. Okay, very crudely drawn. So let's say this stomach is like spills out. So here there is the hiatus, that is the hole that is connecting your esophagus to your stomach. Okay, we're going to look at that more into details later as well. So here in this hiatus, if you have a piece of your stomach that protrudes out of that abdominal cavity and is spilling over to the other side over here, this is called a hiatal hernia. Okay, a lot of times it's asymptomatic, but sometimes it can cause problems. Okay, but this is a type of homeostatic imbalance because stomach should be in abdominal cavity and should not part of it should not be in the other cavity over there. So when this type of protrusion happens, you in general you call that a hernia. Okay. Okay, so sometimes that hernia can come with symptoms like heartburn, okay? And sometimes, as I mentioned, most of the time is asymptomatic, but sometimes you might need to go through surgery to repair the type of hernia. All right, so now let's look a little bit into serous membranes. So when you look at, for example, your heart, so we know that the heart is enclosed in the pericardium. Okay, now my little dog is going crazy again. In 1 second. All right. So when you look at the pericardium, okay, we know that the heart is enclosed in this membrane, but this is, okay, the whole house is breaking loose. This membrane here is really interesting because one part of the membrane is going to be connected to the organ, that in this case would be the heart, okay, and another part of the membrane would be connected to the outside part or close to muscles or supporting structures, okay. So what happens here is that first thing you should start thinking is, why is this whole system needed? Why do we need this double sac membrane in the first place? Well, now we have to think, for example, what is the function of the heart? Well, of course, is to beat and pump blood all over the body. Remember that we said that if you have a muscle that is constantly contracting, it is going to generate heat and is also going to create friction. So the function of the membrane is to quench that the whole functioning of the heart. So you don't want friction to happen, otherwise the heart can malfunction, and you don't want a lot of heat to be developing out of the friction, otherwise you can overheat and burn out your heart. Okay, so when you look at this pericardium, you're going to see that it is cushioning the heart just like a balloon, as like you have over here. Okay, this is represented a fist through the balloon. So this is going to be very important to avoid friction and also to protect the heart from other movements or other body parts that could harm it. So this double membrane is filled up with a sort of a liquid that is kind of viscous, and you call that serous liquid. Okay, so this serous fluid is really the cushioning part that protects the heart. So here's an example here of your pericardium, right? So the part of that pericardium that is closest or basically stuck to your heart, that's the part that is called the visceral pericardium. When you say visceral, it's always referring to the part of the membrane that is stuck to the organ that it is protecting. Okay, so visceral, it should remind you of gut, but visceral in this case is really related to proximity to the organ. So the part of the pericardium that is close to the organ, that's the visceral pericardium. And then the part of the membrane that is away from the organ, that is your parietal pericardium, right? And between these two membranes, you have the serous fluid that is filling up. And it's not a lot of fluid, really, but it's important for it to be present inside of those of that double-walled sac. Okay, so now we get into quadrants. So the easiest quadrants to know is really dividing the abdominal cavity or abdominal pelvic cavity into four parts. So what do you mean four parts? Well, first thing, you divide into right and left. So remember, this is anatomical position. So this side here is the right side of your patient. The other one is the left side. So if you draw a line right in the middle, you're going to divide that into right and left. Okay, well, my line is not very straight here. Okay, so you're going to divide this into right and left. Then you divide the line right here in the middle, and now you're going to have upper and lower. So this is really easy. You just have to know major organs there are in each one of those quadrants. And sometimes, yeah, the organ is kind of like in more than one quadrant, so I'm not going to ask you about that, okay? So let's see something that I could ask you that would be fair. For example, here, if you look at the gallbladder, the green thing here, under the liver, okay? The gallbladder is clearly in the right upper quadrant, right? So let's just divide here, upper and lower. Okay, lower, all right? So let's see here, your gallbladder, that's a fair game, okay? Now, let's say if you look at your stomach, the stomach is mainly on the left upper quadrant, also fair game. And let's say here if we see the bladder, not the gallbladder, but just the urinary bladder. Well, that's like right in the middle between the right and the left. But it is in the lower quadrant, lower quadrants, okay? So it would be lower part, lower quadrants. Okay. Now, if I say small intestine, well, that's like kind of all over. So, of course, I'm not going to ask about the small intestine. Okay. And then it gets more complicated. Now we get to these 9 abdominal pelvic regions, and basically you have this tic-tac-toe shape. And yeah, there are some things that you should definitely know about these divisions over here. First thing to know, well, draw your TikTok, your hashtag symbol here, okay? Tic-tac-toe symbol, all right? So what you should know, right in the middle, you're gonna have your belly button. You call this middle region the umbilical region. Umbilical is for your belly button. So umbilical region right there. Then you're gonna have things that are on top of it and things that are below the umbilical, right? So if something is on top of it, you're gonna say this is the epigastric region. Okay, epigastric, on top of the gastric region. Something is right below the umbilicum, I mean below your body, your belly button, what do you expect to find? Obviously, the pubic region. Okay, you can also call that hypogastric region. Hypo for under. So here is your umbilical, this is hypo, and this is not hyper, but epigastric region. Your hypo, also pubic. All right, so you took our part of the middle here. Now let's go to the left and right sides. You go here to the top left, and that's easy. This one was epigastric. Now, oh, that's weird. Left, hypochondriac. What? Hypochondriac? Usually you call hypochondriac somebody that thinks that they're sick all the time. Oh, okay, that's a strange word. Now that word, it really has the origin in that it is below the vertebra, I mean, below the, um, uh, okay, now I went blank again. The ribs, okay, below the ribs, right here. So hypochondriac, chondriac is for the ribs, hypo is for under. So hypochondriac just means below the ribs. How did that get originated and related to somebody who thinks they're sick all the time? Well, it's a long story, but hypochondriac really means that is below the ribs. Maybe because people who felt that they were sick all the time, they were feeling that this region was always hurting or something like that if you look in history books. But okay, you have left hypochondriac region and you have right hypochondriac region. Remember, in the middle you have your epigastric region. Okay. So we covered this and that. So now let's see what is left at the lower parts. Remember, here's your umbilical region. When you go to the right of your patient, you have the right lateral. Okay, that's easy enough. It is to the right and it's to the side. All right. Go to the other side, you have the left lateral. Okay, easy enough. Also, those are called lumbar regions because when you look at the spine, this part is going to be close to the lumbar vertebrae. Okay, so you have right lumbar, left lumbar. They're very close to your belly button. And then you go to the bottom, you have the right inguinal region and left inguinal region. Okay, so make sure you know this division over here. And then you should know a little bit about the organs that are right behind those regions. Again, I'm just going to ask something that is really, really obvious. For example, here, the urinary bladder. Remember, when you only had a quadrant, this was right in the middle of right and left quadrant. But now that you have this hashtag symbol, now it's really obvious that the urinary bladder is in this inguinal region right here. Okay, so now you can distinguish that is specifically which part of the body that you're finding a specific organ. Now again, you have certain organs that are typical of certain regions, but a lot of them will cross over to different regions. Now, one thing that is good to know is about this little piece of intestine right there, the appendix. Okay, so the appendix is clearly at your, or I was going to ask the class, which side is this now? This is your patient right side for your anatomical position, right? So your appendix is at the right side of this inguinal region right there. Okay, so know where the appendix is located because that is one that is clearly identified. And we know that appendicitis is relatively a common problem that happens when the appendix gets inflamed, and then you have to to undergo surgery most of the time to take it out. Otherwise, you can undergo sepsis and die. Okay, and here's another question for you. So let's try that again. Which single abdominal pelvic region, oh, is the bladder located? So now you gotta figure that one out. Ray, did you open it? All right, is everybody answering? Let me know when time is up.
5 seconds. Okay, time's up.
All right, what's your answer? Any brave soul still awake?
Oh yeah, sorry, they said B. Sorry, I keep forgetting that you can't hear that.
Okay, I can't hear anything. All right, B is a hypogastric region. Okay. All right, and now right at the end of this class, I know we only have official 6 minutes to go, and oh my God, a lot of slides to go. No, I'm not gonna torture you to going through this very quickly, but there are some things that you should know about chapter 2, okay? A lot of this is basic background knowledge, so I'm not gonna go into a lot of details on chapter 2, okay? But I will add a self-study video for you to review your prior knowledge, right, before just coming to this class, right? And I will hold you responsible for covering that information. I will add in the video in the module, okay? So basic things that you should know. I'm only going to take like 3 minutes and then everybody can just run away. All right, I see people running away already. All right, so first thing that you should know, everything in the body has to do with energy and usage of energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. Also, energy is not going to take up space, right? Energy is the capacity to do work. Okay. Now, when you talk about energy, you're mainly going to talk about two types of energy. One of them is going to be energy in motion, that is kinetic energy. Another one is going to be potential energy, energy that you store. Okay. So I see a lot of people just want to run away because it's so late and everybody must be starving by now. I'm going to stop at this slide and I'm going to include the rest or most of this PowerPoint in your self-study video. So before we just conclude the class,